Okay, we want to look at parallel and perpendicular slopes. We're familiar with these terms, but I want to briefly just look at them again. Now we can see we have a picture of two parallel lines here, L1 and L2. And we can see that the two parallel lines are moving in the same direction and they're never going to touch. Right? That's what two parallel lines are. They never touch. What we're dealing with when we're talking about slopes are two slopes that are parallel if and only if the two slopes are exactly equal. That means that the slope of L1, we can call it M1, has to be exactly equal to the slope of L2, that we can call M2. If they're different in even the slightest amount, they're not parallel. Now, two slopes are perpendicular if and only if the two slopes are opposite reciprocals, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, we need to remember that the two perpendicular lines form a 90-degree angle. And we can see here that L1 and L2 intersect each other, and where they intersect, they form a 90-degree angle. We can tell by the little box that's on here. Two slopes are perpendicular, as I said, if the slopes are opposite reciprocals. Opposite reciprocals are a little unusual. It's not something that we see a lot in our day-to-day lives. Basically, what we're looking at is if we have the slope of L1, and that's M1, we would say that the opposite reciprocal of M1 would be 1 over negative M1. So that means that the opposite reciprocal is basically we take the fraction of the slope, we flip it upside down, and then we change the sign. If it was positive, it becomes negative. If it was negative, it becomes positive. So that means we could say that M1 is equal to 1 over negative M2. Another way to look at this is that if we took the slopes of both of our lines, L1 and L2, and we multiplied them together, that is, we multiplied M1 times M2, we would get negative 1. If that's true, then the two lines are perpendicular. But that's the only time that the two lines are perpendicular. Alright, now we want to take a minute to tell whether the lines are parallel or perpendicular. They could also be neither, and in fact, in most cases, two lines are usually not going to be parallel or perpendicular. But if we're given two lines, we should be able to decide whether or not they're parallel or perpendicular. To do that, we find the two slopes, and then we see if either one of those situations is true. Are the two slopes exactly equal? If they are, then they're parallel. Are the two slopes opposite reciprocals? If they are, then they're perpendicular. If neither one of those two things is true, then the two lines are neither parallel nor perpendicular. Now, I want you to find the slopes of both of these lines and then decide whether they're parallel or perpendicular. Pause the video, get an answer, and then unpause it, and you can see how you do. Alright, so if we want to figure out if these are parallel or perpendicular, I've done the work here. As you can see, I defined x1 and y1 and x2 and y2 for both of my lines. I worked out both of my slopes. And what I saw was that the slope M1 in this example is 6 over 5. The slope of M2 is 5 over negative 6. That means that these two slopes are opposite reciprocals. Since they're opposite reciprocals, they're perpendicular. Let's try one more example. Keep in mind we can have a parallel line where the two slopes are equal. We can have a perpendicular line where the two slopes are opposite reciprocals, or we can just have two lines that intersect. Okay, so let's see how we did here. You can see, again, I defined x1, y1, and x2 and y2 for both lines. and we did our arithmetic and we saw that the slope of line 1, M1, is equal to 2. The slope of line 2, M2, when we worked it out, we can see we got negative 1 over negative 2. Well, having a negative on both top and bottom of the fraction canceled them out, and we were left with the slope of 1 over 2. However, 2 and 1 over 2 are not opposite reciprocals. They're very close because they are reciprocals, but they're not opposite. They're obviously not the same number. 2 does not equal 1 over 2. They're not opposite reciprocals, so these lines are neither parallel nor perpendicular.